I'm Egbert, the owner of this station. Check out my website at egbert.com. That's EGGBURT, egbert.com. Now it's back to Brad and John. Check out their website at bjshow.co. The BJ Show? Come on, guys. Anyway, here's B and J.
John, you touched on this in our A block. We're in the B block right now. For those of you taking charge of this, or at least taking note of this, I sound like Joe Biden now, don't I? Okay, the quote from the mayor is, this is on the KSDK article. I don't know if you've seen this or not. St. Louis mayor reacts to holiday weekend violence downtown. Quote, "The city has done everything we can do, but our hands are tied." Now, let me ask you something. If you lived in the city and you heard the mayor say, "We've done everything we can, our hands are tied," wouldn't you say, bologna sandwich?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple different ways to look at that. If you're still living in the city and you have the means to leave, you've probably already left, don't you think? I don't know. I mean, I know that there are some people who genuinely believe in the city and care about the city and are steadfast in that they're not leaving. But I would definitely feel like, I don't know what the other side to that argument is, Brad.
Well,
like, other than Tishaura Jones saying she needs more time, what's the other side to that argument?
Well, once again, I mean, the other side of that argument is, okay, somebody new needs to come in who doesn't have this terrible attitude. I mean, think about it for a minute. I mean, on so many levels, if there's a problem with, let's say there's people speeding in your neighborhood and you got a lot of kids that want to go out and play in the streets and you live in a subdivision, there's people speeding through the neighborhood, and you call up the chief of police. Let's say you're in, I don't know, Wildwood or something. No, Wildwood's wrong because they have county police. Let's say Town and Country, okay? You're in Town and Country and there's people speeding through your subdivision, and you call up the mayor and the chief of police and they go, "Well, there's nothing we can do. Our hands are tied. Speeder's going to speed." Aren't you going to say, "Hold on a minute now. That's not the answer." The answer is come into the neighborhood, run radar, and crack down on the speeders and show a force, that kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying?
I get exactly what you're saying. And, it certainly doesn't embolden citizens to feel like, it increases the sense of helplessness. So if even the mayor says our hands are tied, then what are we supposed to do? Like, other than moving out, what's the answer?
Well,
barricade yourself in your house.
But see, you elect people. See, here we go again. We're in an election right now with all these people. If you elect me, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And how many of them, we need to get like the Snopes people are like, see, that's what you do, John. This should be johncombest2.com, where what you do is you take all these elected officials people running for elected positions, and you put all their platforms and, I'm going to do this, I'm going to crack down on that. And then you put it up on the website, and then you go back a year later and say, a year ago when so-and-so was running for office, he said he was going to do X, Y, and Z. As of today, he's done none of those, but nobody ever does that. You know what I'm saying?
Now, isn't that the role? And didn't that used to be the role of the media? Well,
okay.
You know what you could have, though, Brad? In a year, you could have a friendly reporter come to the mayor's office and say, "We hear that you've had tremendous success in fighting crime. Can you tell us a little bit about it?"
What's that?
And then they could have a spot of tea together,
Oh, so in other words, you're saying put that would be Tishaura Jones. Oh, Tishaura. The interesting thing about it is I heard Jane Dueker talk about this yesterday. See, I'm like Jane Dueker. You got to tag in our thing today. You got to tag Mark Reardon and Jane Dueker. Okay, Jane Dueker talked about this yesterday, and obviously she's got a dog in the fight because she's I think she's the public relations person or she's tied to the city police.
She works for the police officer, sure.
Right, the Police Officers Association. Okay. And she talks about this kind of stuff all the time. And she talks about the fact that like, for example, she gave the example that, like, on some shifts there's 2 cars in downtown St. Louis. 2 cars. Think about that. 2 cars in downtown St. Louis. And you go like, it's just like, I made the comment, remember, I talked about this years ago, I don't know if it's still the same way, but when I was a police dispatcher, I was amazed, like, on the night shift, like, for example, Troop C, which is now headquartered as Missouri Highway Patrol. They used to be out there at 40 Mason, out there at 94 and 40, okay? And Troop C is St. Louis City, St. Louis County, St. Charles County. It's like 11 counties. It's a pretty big area. Okay, there are shifts when there's only 2 cars on in the entire. So that you could have one trooper who's down in Hillsborough, Missouri, and another trooper who's up in Troy, and there's a major accident on 70 and 270, and each officer's going to take them half an hour, 40 minutes to get there. Even lights and siren, the whole bit still. And you go like, oh, hold on a minute, how come there's not more than 2 state troopers in the entire Now, it may have changed, but I know that was a fact years ago when I worked for the one police department, because one of my police buddy mentors was telling me, he said, you'd be surprised how few cars are on the road like in the night shift. I'm going like, well, that's when you need them the most. That's where all the crime's going on.
And so St. Louis City said they touted the fact that they had 124 applications for folks to become police officers. And Jane on Twitter, you can follow her on X at Jane Dueker. She says that is a lie. St. Louis Police is 380 officers short. And she says, quote, 124 applications doesn't mean squat until they are officers.
Well, the other thing she said that this is the thing that I meant to say, but my mind, I was doing a Joe Biden there. The other thing I meant to say was she commented on the fact that the mayor claims the crime statistics are down, and her point was part of the problem is that if you look on the log, apparently you look on the log, there are tons of unanswered calls. There are calls that come in that no police officer ever responds to because they're busy with other things. And she said that nowadays, a lot of people in the city just go, if you dial 911, they're not going to show up anyway. So
yeah, they won't even report it. And one of Jane's other points, she's been banging the drum on this one for a while, is that if there are multiple shootings, and I'm not an expert on how this is documented, Brad, but Jane's point is that there's multiple shootings. Sometimes it's recorded as one crime incident instead of multiple.
Right. Well, and the interview, if you listen to this on when Mark Reardon had this yesterday, part of the interview with Tishaura, she's saying about, well, I live in the North City, and then she says, I live in the West, so I don't know where she lives. She lives in Central West.
Yeah, she said she wasn't sure what to call it. I thought that was funny.
Right. But she says she hears gunshots at night. I'm going like, okay, you're in charge of the city. Fix it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I thought the same thing, Brad, and I thought that one of her people, and by the way, Tishaura's experience, she doesn't need a whole lot of people coaching her, but I'm sure whoever set up this interview and set the ground rules with Alexis Zotos probably reminded Tishaura, look, point out the fact that you hear gunshots at night. You're a single mom. You're scared of your safety. You live in the city. You hear it too. You feel it too. And I'm sure she was reminded that that's a winning message.
John, now, I'm going to give you an example. If you live in Ladue, or you live in Chesterfield, or Frontenac, or Town and Country, and you're a citizen there, and one night you hear gunshots, and you dial 911, how quick are those police departments going to respond?
They'll be right there. And you know what? The likely thing too, Brad, is let me interrupt. If you're in Chesterfield or you're in Town and Country, and you say, hey, a couple minutes ago I heard gunshots, I have called the local police before about something I've seen or heard, and they've said, thank you, we've already gotten several calls about it.
And exactly right.
And I'm talking, and by the way, when someone answers the phone and I'm talking to a human being who's competent, who speaks English, who is able to say thank you, we've gotten several calls about this already.
Right, but Jane also mentioned the fact that there still is a shortage of 911 dispatchers and operators in the city of St. Louis, and she said that they had the problem in St. Louis County, but they did a lot of proactive, campaigning for people to apply, and then they put a lot of people through the courses and stuff like that. And she says now St. Louis County is pretty much totally staffed for 911, but there's still a deficiency in the number of 911 operators and dispatchers in the city of St. Louis. I'm going like, how can that be? I don't understand the whole crazy thing. Okay, changing topics. Okay, I got to keep track of what I'm talking about here. We're talking about Tish. Okay, yesterday was an absolute positive, perfect example of what I talk about all the time. What I talk about, the fact that people know things, but they just won't say anything because they are protecting their own interest. Okay? Yesterday, I heard an interview with Chuck Todd. You know who Chuck Todd is?
Oh, yeah, I know him well. Yeah, formerly of the Hotline, and he's been a host of Has he been a host of Meet the Depressed for
Well, yeah,
how long?
for a long time. He was the guy who succeeded, who's the poor guy that died who was really good?
Oh, Tim Russert.
Tim Russert, okay.
Yep.
Chuck Todd was the guy for Meet the Depressed, and he's also still a reporter, a journalist for NBC News. He was interviewed yesterday. I don't know what the background was. I just heard the interview. Matter of fact, I heard it on a couple different stations. It shows what a nerd I am as far as talk radio is concerned. Anyway, and he was talking about the fact that 2 years ago, he wouldn't say who this was, but he says this was a top-level cabinet person that he was talking to, and the person was essentially saying, yeah, Biden's lost it, man. And Chuck's saying, like, well, what do you mean? Aren't you in meetings with Limbaugh? No, we don't have that many meetings. He says, rarely do I get called into the meeting. And when we do, it's highly orchestrated. He's talking about the fact that 2 years ago, that this top-level government secretary position, so you can figure how many secretary in the cabinet? What, like 30 people or something like that? There's education and Department of Transportation, all this kind of things. Okay. First off, this has been going on for a long time. Second off, this was told to Chuck Todd 2 years ago, okay? I think he said 2.5 years ago. As a journalist, shouldn't he have come on the air and said, well, I got a good friend of mine, and I'm not going to say who it is, but he's a top-level cabinet person. He says that Joe Biden is not very functional, and he has a tough time in meetings, and he forgets things. I mean, once again, here he's protecting Biden. Like all these journalists, it's like I give the example. If you would have interviewed those, I think there were 9 people on that CNN panel before the debate, and you interviewed each one of them. Oh, we're so excited! This is going to be a great debate. We're going to see how good Donald Trump is against the amazing Joe Biden, who is the debate king. And remember years ago he just left Tim Ryan. Was it Tim Ryan? Was that the guy who was vice president against when they had the vice presidential debate? It was Biden.
Paul Ryan.
Okay, yep. And he made Paul Ryan look like he made it look bad. Okay, and then after the debate, the first guy, John King. Well, this is terrible. And then stupid George Clooney comes out yesterday. Once again, let me vent on this. Okay, George Clooney, who orchestrated this big fundraiser. What was it? A month ago now?
Yeah, like not long ago, 6 weeks ago.
Right, out in Hollywood. And remember, this was the infamous fundraiser where there was no press allowed, but somebody in the audience had their phone, and the infamous video clip of Obama when they're on stage with Jimmy Kimmel. It was Jimmy Kimmel, it was Joe Biden and Barack Obama. Barack Obama grabs Biden by the arm and leads him off stage. Everybody's going like, wow, look at this. And who orchestrated that fundraiser? George Clooney. Yesterday he comes out with an op-ed, was the New York Times, wasn't it? Essentially saying, well, I knew with my fundraiser he'd lost it. Well then, dude, why did you raise money for him? Why? I mean, if you were a person, and I'm not that kind of a person. We're talking people that are writing 6- and 7-figure, and in some cases 8-figure checks, right? Tens of millions of dollars. Everybody there, I think it cost you, what was it? Like, it was like $10,000 just to get in or something.
The point is a lot of money. Your point is a lot of money.
Ton of money, okay? George Clooney, shame on you. Shame on you, Chuck Todd. Once again, if you know these things and you're in a position of authority, when you talk, people listen. If George Clooney would call up, John Combest today and said, John, you're not going to believe it, but I listened to the BJ show in the morning, and I'd like to address a couple of different points about it. Aren't you going to come on tomorrow and say, Brad, you're not going to guess who I talked to yesterday? I talked to George Clooney, right?
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, I don't answer my phone, so I would send him right to voicemail if I saw that he called. Number 2, I wouldn't talk about it on the air. Number 3, though, in defense of Chuck Todd, let's play that out, Brad. Chuck Todd gets on the air and says, hey, listen, I have it from a reputable source that Joe Biden's losing it, that his faculties are diminishing quickly, and it's a real threat to the presidency. How soon do you think somebody from the White House would ever send somebody on Chuck Todd's show ever again?
I get it.
Chuck Todd wouldn't be invited to the fun parties. Chuck Todd wouldn't be part of the social groups anymore. So what's Chuck Todd going to do? He's just going to say, well, I mean, some right-wing people they're making these cheap fakes about how the president doesn't have it together anymore, but that's just hogwash. So of course he's not going to report that, Brad.
Yes, but once again, you and I, the people who, and see, the interesting thing about this is, go back to Rush Limbaugh, okay? Go back to Rush Limbaugh, where Rush Limbaugh came on the air and did all this bombastic stuff, the collar abortions and, the NAGS, National Association gals, put a condom over his microphone for safe talk, all sorts of crazy stuff, okay? He drew attention to himself, but the one thing he hammered was, and he called it the drive-by media. In other words, the idea being is the majority of the media is in the tank. They're liberals, they're left-wingers, whatever you want to call them, okay? And he brought that to attention of a lot of people. A lot of people were not aware of that. They thought that when they watched Walter Cronkite or Dave Hunt, the Huntley Brinkley report, or even on a local level, Karen Foss, they thought they were getting an unbiased, unvarnished report on what was going on. When now you realize most of the people who are, obviously like the guy who came out, the NPR dude who came out who ultimately quit, where he comes out, he says, nobody on staff voted for Trump. Everybody's a registered Democrat. How are those people giving us an unbiased view of what's going on? There was a guy on, I don't know, can't remember his name anymore. When I used to run on my AM station, when it was the Mouth, we ran Neil Bortz, and Neil Bortz had this guy on, and he worked for Cox. And Neil Bortz worked at a Cox station, and this guy was, and Cox owned a bunch of TV stations. They had their own Capitol Hill reporter, Jamie something or other, and he was fascinating because of the fact that he was very, very, very unbiased. And Neil used to give him crap all the time because Neil obviously was a conservative. And he used to give him crap all the time. And one time, Jamie, I'll see if I can find the guy's name. I think he finally retired. He talked about the fact that he doesn't vote anymore. And Neil says, what do you mean you don't vote anymore? Because I heard this live on the air. And Jamie says, I don't vote anymore because he says, I try to be unbiased. And when I say I'm unbiased, that means I don't favor one candidate over the other because I don't vote. And I thought to myself, wow, is that a breath of fresh air? You know what I'm saying? I mean, this guy is...
Yeah, and I mean, you can imagine if you took that NPR thing to a St. Louis radio station, like if you took it to St. Louis Public Radio, I mean, you think there's one or two people that might vote for Republican candidates? I mean, I think there's probably one that might vote for a Republican candidate.
Who's that?
Well, I don't think it's Elaine Shaw or whatever other diversity hire is. By the way, there's a story today about how, and this is important to flag, I think, that we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of the violent attack on Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson. And so there will anticipate a lot more victimhood stories. There's a story, I guess Michael Brown's mom went to some international thing. I'm guessing it's a fundraising gimmick, or she wants money, or certainly attention. But Bradis, we're coming up on the 10-year thing about that. We're going to see more and more stories. It might be a good reason to riot. It might be a good reason to burn down a QT or steal athletic shoes from somewhere, or generally loot. I don't know. But we should keep that in mind. And if you have travel plans, you might want to keep in mind what could be going on at the 10-year anniversary of the attack on Darren Wilson.
By the way, you didn't believe me, but yesterday I'm punching buttons, and I just happened to hit the button for KWMU, St. Louis Public Radio, exactly at 12 noon, and here comes a little theme song, and here comes Elaine Chow, and she says, we're back from our summer vacation. Remember I told you they took us.
Are they really back?
Oh, yeah, as of yesterday.
Oh, nice.
They're back.
Very good.
They're back. And when I told you that on the air, I said, well, there's no local show on KWMU for 2 weeks. And I go, they're on summer vacation. You go, no way. And I go, yeah, they all go on summer vacation. It's like, okay, like they don't get enough time off, okay?
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?